If you could give me an overview of this particular research project.
More than a specific hypothesis, let me tell you a little bit this story. So I've been working with the Latino community and Latino children for many, many years. So first I start looking at their achievement outcomes, right? To see from a national perspective how they are doing in relationship with other kids and other racial ethnic groups and groups from other SCS backgrounds. So of course, as we know, even though the gaps in achievement have decreased over time, there's still a major disadvantage. Because I usually conceptualize outcomes, educational outcomes, from a much more holistic perspective, I also start looking at indicators of social emotional development, which, as we know, are extremely important for future well-being within school and in the labor force. So surprisingly, when I was working on this project with my colleagues at Berkeley, we found that Latino kids, in spite of expectations, were doing pretty well in terms of their social emotional development. They were following instructions in kindergarten. They knew how to respond to conflict in the classroom, how to interact with kids. So at that point, we saw this amazing paradox, right? On the one hand, Latino kids are not doing so well in academic outcomes. On the other hand, they were doing so strongly. So then the next question is, okay, what is going on in the family, right?
You had mentioned that Latino kids were doing so well with the social emotional aspect, but not as well with the academic.
Yes. Then we start wondering what is going on in Latino families that in some ways are doing such a strong work with the kids to prepare them social emotionally, but maybe not so good in terms of academically. So that's where I start expanding my research to try to understand what is going on in the families. So one thing that we found, and again, this is not about this study, but we found earlier, is that the relationships between Latino families were less conflict between, for example, mothers and fathers. And of course, I'm generalizing, the Latino population is very diverse, but we found this on average. So relationship between mothers and fathers were less conflictive than what we've seen before, and in some ways they were involving their kids into their daily living practices more naturally, I would say. On the other hand, at that point we also learned that maybe the reading practices that we need to see in the home were not present there, so they were less likely to read newspapers or read books with the kids. So that's kind of one area that then brought us to think about math and what's happening with math, because it's very interesting. We know much more about reading than about math. So we said, okay, let's try to think, how is math embedded in Latino families' daily livings? How do mothers think about math? How they conceptualize their role? And what practices do they do at home to foster, if any, math learning? So I guess the other important piece is that most or many of the research have brought important, I would say, have emphasized the deficit perspectives of the Latino families. However, what we wanted to do, and what I've been trying to do with my entire research, is to say, okay, let's try to really explore what is going on, to identify both strengths, areas that we could grow from, and also areas that we could improve. So if we put all these different pieces together, that's when I start doing this specific project.
Why the focus on math, and what is it that you and your colleagues wanted to determine about that early math before school?
Because we know much more about reading and math. 2, I teach statistics, and I know how much kids struggle with having basic understanding on math. So we talked a lot about reading. Reading is much more easier found in our homes. We have books, we spend time reading, but we don't know so much about math. And at the same time, I think it's a problem. Our emotions around math are not as positive. A lot of people do not like math. A lot of people feel that they are not good at math. So we really think, and of course, we found research that shows how important is not only feel confident of ourselves as learners, but also know math, because it's a language that it really helps us understand a life in a different perspective.
So you're looking at math as
Yes.
this language. Tell me what you and your colleagues did to study this in the homes.
I guess the initial impetus for this study came from my work with Latina mothers in Baltimore communities, where I would do workshops and training with them, and we start talking about what learning means, how they feel about helping kids. So then we decided to be more systematic, and of course, still within an exploratory approach, because we really do not know much about math in the Latino families. So we start gathering information, talking with mothers, even at some point seeing how mothers and their kids were relating together, were in the home playing or sharing time. We then try to decide, okay, how does mom thinks about math? How they socialize their kids in math learning. So we started this exploratory, because it's a small sample, study, and we collected data, I would say, at different times, but for about 3 years.
How many kids were involved?
Basically 47 mothers with whom we chat. Sometimes it was very nice. Sometimes we chat, we meet at moms' homes, so family was around. Sometimes moms will use their kids as part of the interview, and other times we will meet at an early care center or at a community-based center. So the idea is that we wanted Latino mothers to feel comfortable communicating with us and sharing their perspectives.
How would you be able to study the mom's involvement in math activities at home?
This paper comes from a larger study. For this specific paper, what we did was mostly talk with mothers, ask them questions, but we also have seen, and we're trying to expand now our observations at home to try to see how mothers' perceptions really transfer into their daily practices. But we decided, to start with, okay, what it is that moms are thinking, what it is that they are telling us. So we mostly start doing interviews, Spanish speakers, myself, and another Spanish speaker, many, I would say 2 or 3 Spanish speaker grad students will go interview, talk with moms. And we were very careful and try to make them feel comfortable so they wouldn't feel that we are like testing them or anything like that.
What did you find from those conversations with moms? What were the attitudes about math, and what came out of all of those conversations?
It was amazing. It was super impressive. It was super challenging for me, I would say, as a privileged person. Because first, let me talk a little bit about these mothers. As we know, Latino mothers in this area, in some cases they have 2 jobs, they don't necessarily speak English, they're struggling to make ends meet. But it was fascinating what a strong commitment they have with their learning of their kids. So of course, when we start talking about math, some of them felt very nervous and they didn't even know to respond. But then they start talking about their conceptions about math. So let's talk first about that. It was very interesting because mothers brought both school-based conceptions and out-of-school conceptions of math. So school-based conceptions are, of course, numbers, operations, which usually what kids learn in school, right? But out-of-school conceptions were super interesting because moms were emphasizing the importance of math for daily living, the importance of math for the future well-being of their kids. So they would say, for example, a mother, I remember perfectly, she would say, I definitely want my kids to learn math. Math, for me, it's very important. So whatever they grow up and they have a business, so they will know how they handle their bills. So this conception about how important was math beyond what we usually think about numbers and operations was important. Yes, I would say half of the mothers didn't like math. and one of the reasons, or I would say the main reason why they didn't like math is because they didn't felt that they were good at math. which this is just a parenthesis. This is something that I work with mothers. I hate the word train, but I've done workshop with mothers, and I try to teach how they could teach their kids learn math. And I do basic operations. And the start, they're all very nervous. They don't feel like you ask them to do 3 + 2, right? Because we're talking about kids. They don't know how to respond. They get tense. But as soon as you start using artifacts, for example, and you use like blocks or Lego pieces or any materials from the home, they start feeling much more comfortable. So this notion about, I may not like math, or I'm not so good at math, was present. So it was interesting because, yes, the conceptions of math that we found in the Latino sample were, I would say, a little bit restricted, in the sense that they didn't have a huge understanding of math as problem solving or math as equations, but they did have this understanding of math as embedded in daily living, which was very interesting. When then we tried to kind of gather information about socialization, we tried to look for 4 different areas. One is how they see themselves as responsible for their kids' math learning. 1. 2, what are the strategies that they use to teach their kids math at home? 3, who is involved in learning, in helping young kids learn math at home? And 4, how they see themselves as role models. So again, it was fascinating. The commitment that these mothers had to try to help their kids was present in almost every interview, and that was super telling for me. They all felt that they should be helping their kids learn, that they wanted to help their kids. Sometimes they recognized that maybe they didn't have the resources to help, but they really wanted to. Then they talk about learning at home, not only as a mom's responsibility, but also as a family responsibility. So in many cases, we have fathers, for example. If for whatever reason the father felt more comfortable, father would be helping kids learn math, or older siblings. So the notion about it takes a village was definitely present. In terms of strategies, what we found is that mothers talk about practicing. Mothers also talked, which it was surprising, and we really want to explore more, about watching TV as a way to teach your kids math. Dora, Sesame Street, and other research have shown how sometimes we use TV to foster English skills, but in this case, it was also to foster math skills. We also have moms talking about engaging their kids in daily living. So when they cook, when they go to the supermarket, talking about math. So when they go up the stairs or down the stairs, they will count with their kids, 1, 2, 3 steps, or hey, how many cars. Less frequently that they were helping them with homework. And one thing that it was very important, and it did emerge in some mothers, is that they talk about being present. Especially those mothers that didn't know how to help them specifically with math, they would say, I will be present with her. I will be there when she's doing homework. I will be support. But it was not necessarily a math-specific strategy, but a strategy where mothers were supporting. So even though these strategies were all very important and I would say relevant to the Latino culture, in some ways they were not necessarily systematically implemented. We tried to identify areas of strengths and opportunities for improvement, right? So when I say that they had these strategies, which are important as a starting point, we also found, for example, that these strategies were not necessarily systematically integrated. Okay, that mothers may do their involvement in math, maybe sometimes were just responding to their kids' demands to being involved in. So yeah, we needed to do, and that's something that we are really thinking about. How do we then help mothers to have strategies that they're much more systematically implemented?
If you could give us a summary of what those findings were and what they suggest.
To summarize the main findings of the study. First, it it was gladly surprising to see the strengths, to see the positive dispositions of Latino mothers, how they care about their kids, how they care about their kids learning so they could get ahead in life. So I would say that was one major finding. Two, yes, not all of our mothers felt comfortable with math. Sometimes some of them felt that it was difficult, that they didn't like it. But in spite of these dispositions, they still saw math as something that it was super important for their kids' future well-being, for their daily lives, and then use different strategies to help kids learn math. Being present, talking with kids, talking math with kids, involving kids in daily activities that are related to math, playing, or just being present.
When you're talking about in the home, some things that you can do, can you give me some specifics so I can give parents ideas of some ways that they can start this conversation?
But before, just let me tell you a little bit about the other piece of the study. So even though we found important strategies that were used at home, they were not necessarily used in the systematic way. So that means that there's a lot of space for improvement. So one thing that I always talk and work with mothers, one, whatever they are doing, it's a perfect start. So they need to feel proud of how much they are doing. They may not know how to multiply or how to divide, but the starting point that they are doing with their kids and how they are raising their kids, it's a very good start. Two, there are very simple ways that mothers can use at home to help their kids fostering number sense. For example, being very explicit when they're cooking. As we know, in the Latino community, we love food and we love to eat, right? So have your kids helping while cooking, but you have to start asking questions. For example, okay, if we're gonna do, I don't know, rice, beans, and potatoes. No, rice, beans, that's such a terrible, rice, chicken, and potatoes. Okay, how many potatoes do we need for our dinner? Okay, how many potatoes is your brother gonna eat? Or when you're setting the table or you have a guest, how many people are coming for dinner today? Okay, what it is that you need. Even when they go to the supermarket, and you know, I don't know whether you have kids, but when my son was young, he will always want me to buy him something. So I would say, okay, I have $1 for you to spend in the supermarket, right? What it is that you could get, you buy with it. So, and then you start fostering number skills. Or when you're measuring, when you're doing your rice, right? You measure rice, dry rice, you measure water. These are all the things that you could do with kids. I also use a lot with my mothers this game, Chutes and Ladders. And I help them how to model behaviors. So for example, you start counting, but you teach mothers how to count, how to jump, what happens when you go from one space to the other one. And again, I think it's very important that moms feel comfortable doing. So this type of training, when you empower mothers and give them simple strategies that they could implement, and they are based on what they do, based on their cooking practices, what they have in the kitchen, when they go to the store, are super important to start building number sense. Just in case, this is just a small parenthesis, with Tupperwares, you could do a lot of practices in terms of, you could even put stickers, right, in different Tupperwares. And you could ask your kids, okay, put the Tupperwares that have the same sticker, and you could use basic geometrical figures, put the toppers that are similar together, right? Or for example, okay, let's organize. You could, this may be a little bit disorganized, but I did do a lot of this with my mothers. Let's take out all the Tupperwares from the kitchen, and then let's put the little ones in this side. Let's put the medium size into the other. So these are things that I feel that we could ask our mothers. A lot of them work many hours, so they're not gonna have 2 hours to sit down and do necessarily a lot of work on 3+2, but we could help them figure out how it is through what they do in their daily livings, how it is they could foster math. Talking about math, playing with math, develop the notions, and using the things that they have in the house. Those are very important.
There's always that debate about television and how much is too much and whether it should be educational and what is educational. But there a place for some of these shows in terms of math learning?
I think there's space for anything as long as it's being done in moderation. And TV could be a very good way of fostering language skills and also some basic math skills. So of course, you're not going to put your children 8 hours a day watching TV, right? But if you could figure out some important or some educational TV programs, it's perfectly fine. Of course, it is much better if mom is watching with the kids, if mom is involving in conversations, or let me say something, it doesn't have to be mom, because that's something important in the Latino family. Mom is one key member of the family, but now we have dads, we have siblings, we have grandmas, aunts, uncles.
Why is it so important that kids have these skills, especially early on, these math skills before they get to school?
The early skills are the basis for their learning later. And fostering basic skills is much easier. So it's like if you have the foundations right, then the growing process is going to be much more easy. I don't want to say easier, but the learning curve is going to be much more easier, let's say it in that way. Also, because learning math is related with other learning experiences. So it's not that I learn math. You learn math, but you're also developing critical thinking. You're also developing language skills. So it's kind of, as I said earlier, it's a language. It's a way of seeing life that is important to foster as much as we can.
Just a little bit about your education, where you got your undergraduate, master's, and advanced degrees.
I did my bachelor's in Lima, Peru, where I'm originally from. My bachelor's is in social psychology. Then I worked for many years at the Ministry of Education in Peru, came to the States to do a PhD. It's a very long title. It's Educational Theory and Policy. So it's a dual title, Educational Theory and Policy, Comparative International Education, and a minor in Demography. So I did my PhD then I went to Hopkins to do a postdoc, and then I've been in the academia since then.